Welcome back to Inside Sources. The clock is ticking on Utah's congressional map battle, and the Utah Democratic Party is speaking out after the Utah GOP endorsed Map C as its best option. Republicans are being accused of looping politics into the process. We heard from Todd Weiler in the last segment, who was not on the committee, the commission that heard public comments a week ago. But Luz Escamilla, the Senate Minority Leader, was. Luz, thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you so much, Greg. Always a pleasure.
So tell us where we are in the process right now from your perspective.
We've had two committee hearings last week, as you mentioned, Monday and Wednesday. We are in the taking comments from the public on each individual map. There's 5 maps that the majority presented. We did have Representative Owens, which is the other Democrat in the 10 people committee, and myself. The two of us are the only 2 Democrats in that committee. We presented our own map. And now we're reading the comments. Comments, people are leaving hundreds and hundreds of comments, which is what we want. There's also other maps that will not be considered for purposes of the committee. The committee will meet on Monday before our special session at 8 in the morning, I believe is what we're looking into in calendar, and make a recommendation of one map. I guess what you're saying is that they've been, the Republican Party, I believe, has been promoting Map C, but that decision will be made by the committee, and then it goes to the entire, for the whole legislature to vote on.
So what would be the makeup of the committee? Is it your same group that met last week?
Correct. It's the same committee. So it's what we call the Redistricting 2025 Committee, which is smaller than the regular redistricting committees. It's just based on time, that we got those instructions about the timeline that we need to follow from the court. They decided to have a smaller committee, and that's the committee that will make that recommendation to the whole of the entire legislature. Okay,
so I'm looking at the standards that Prop 4 set, and there are eight of them, and I don't want to go through those. But do you feel that your proposed map either follows those standards better, or that maybe the Republican maps don't follow any of those, or do you think that it's just a matter of interpretation for all 6 of the proposed maps?
And I love that you're an attorney, so this is like in the world of legally world, right? So one, I believe the Democrat proposal follows really the intent of Prop 4. And Prop 4 was brought by the people for the people, right? This was not legislation from the legislature. So for both Representative Owens and myself, and I think the Democrat caucuses, both the House and the Senate, we want to stick to Prop 4 in the entire entity of Prop 4, which is now it's codified in statute. And it's beyond those standards that you're talking about. There's like the 7 standards, but then you have these other pieces related to using the best measures and standards, like the best practices. And the goal is that Prop 4 will be the rule of the law for like many more redistricting processes, right? So we stick to, the Prop 4 asked for a redistricting committee that we didn't there was no time to put it in place, but we were, really following also recommendations from the redistricting committee that met on 2021 in their recommendations, which is how our map started, which is the Escamilla-Owens map. So to us, it's very, very important, Greg, that we are following Prop 4. And to my view, there's been a lot of interpretations made by the majority in terms of what those criteria are that are not necessarily defined per se. And I think the judge, in this case, Judge Gibson, has said, look, legislature, go back and do your job and get a map, right, because that is still a process, and that's what we're doing. For us, it's been important to stick to Prop 4 and the language within Prop 4.
So I have a question from one of our listeners, Luz, and I appreciate you. I'm putting you on the spot a little bit here because I don't know the answer to this, but it said, why weren't any of the maps from the independent group submitted? They submitted 4 or 5. Were there other groups that submitted proposed maps?
So let me answer that. So our map actually started from one of the maps of the Independent Redistricting Committee, because we were really wanting to follow that piece, but we had to make some modifications. Part of it is the interpretation of our legal counsel is that we have to start from scratch the whole process. But in our view, very similar to what you're your listener was asking, we felt it was important and it was a good start because that redistricting committee did have like 19, multiple hearings and months of work and process. So we felt it was important to start there. The other question is, the definition of partisan symmetry, which I know it's becoming more of a problem. And I think there's some disagreements between the majority and the minority with regards to that definition.
So after Prop 4 and there was the Better Boundaries Commission, I guess we'll call it, did that particular group actually come out with a proposed map? And is that a map that's currently being looked at?
So Prop 4, there was an independent redistricting committee created, but it was created after SB 200. So what we need to keep in mind is Prop 4 passes, the legislature changed Prop 4, which is what the Utah Supreme Court said you can't do that, right? So the independent redistricting committee that was created from the SB 200 that changed Prop 4 is what has been said you can't do that. So that's why you can't use any of those maps, specifically. But we, the Democrats, we started our map with some minor modifications from one of the independent redistricting committee maps.
Okay, and so public comment period right now, Luz, goes until the 6th. There's
October the 5th. The
5th.
end of the 5th.
Okay,
yeah.
And then you all meet in special session on the 6th, is
that
right?
6th.
Okay,
Correct.
and then walk us through what happens from there. I know you've already done that before, but just help me again.
Yeah, so, you can submit your comments up to October the 5th, and then October 6th, the legislature meets, and they will have one map presented that will go directly to the judge for the judge to make that decision. And I'm not sure what the plaintiffs are going to do because this is obviously part of that case, right? That's still out there. So the legislature will bring a map, and that will be presented as the legislature's map.
So the judge doesn't make a decision from the 6 maps. She gives, and I'm guessing here, a thumbs up or down on the map that ultimately comes out of you all next week.
Correct, but I also think that the judge will also consider potentially a plaintiff's map. I don't know what the plaintiff's plan is, and so I think the judge is saying, legislature, bring your map, and that will be the process that we're right now in the middle and finishing on October 6th. That map then gets submitted. So, I don't know that the judge is going to consider any other map except the one, like you said, that the legislature is proposing. And I don't know at that point where the plaintiffs are in that process.
What would be your guess, Luz, as to why the Republicans are pushing a particular map, Map C? Because as I look at the maps, Map A and C are by a few streets almost identical, and Map B is not too different. But why are they pushing C?
I don't know. I mean, we've been very, we've asked a lot of questions about how the maps were created that were presented, those 5 maps. We have been concerned about, just the process to have that expert that they hired, Dr. Trendy, to, create also the partisan symmetry testing that was, as we were doing the exercise of drawing a lot of maps, all of our the testing on partisan symmetry was failing on everything, and we were like, what's happening? We couldn't understand. We still at this point do not understand how that was happening because we didn't have access to that expert. So I think those are part of some of our concerns, Greg, and it's a very complex piece because there's a lot of statistical pieces related to this. But for us, are we sticking to Prop 4 language? Are we following every part of Prop 4 is our number one priority because that's what the people voted for.
Very well. That was Luz Escamilla, Senate Minority Leader, joining us this morning, and she's always been very, very helpful to the show. We do have Utah Democratic Party Chair Brian King joining us. Before we talk about the congressional maps, Brian, and by the way, thanks for joining us this morning. What can you tell us about your take on the shutdown, where we are, and if there's what the hope is on the horizon?
Well, nobody among the Democratic Party leadership or members of Congress wants a shutdown. It harms Americans. It harms our ability of government to get things done that help people and that address the real problems that they have in their lives. I've been really surprised by the degree to which Republican leadership from President Trump on down in Congress have been unwilling to meet with and unwilling to negotiate with and just talk to the Democratic leaders about how they can avoid a shutdown. Trump and his folks seem to relish this idea. I mean, they look forward to this, it seems to me, because as is becoming more clear in the last couple of days, I think they see this as an opportunity to carry out more doging, to make more government cuts. And so I think they feel this is a political winner. I think they're misjudging this. I think people are going to recognize that this government shutdown is much more the responsibility of the Republican leadership in Congress and in the White House than it is the Democrats.
Yeah, and we talked yesterday, Brian. We actually had a poll that came out, and I don't remember the source of it yesterday, but we did. The Americans are divided three ways, as you might expect, but the biggest group of people that had blame were Americans who blamed the Republicans on this. It was something like 38%. They blamed Democrats, something like 25%, and then they blamed both parties, whatever the balance is, 31%. But maybe the Republicans misgauged or misguessed where the level of frustration would be. But right now it seems to be at the feet of the Republicans.
Right. Well, I mean, the Republicans control both the White House and both chambers of Congress. So I think that's one of the reasons people look at the Republicans and say, hey, do what's necessary to make government work. And it's true that to get the 60 votes that they need in the Senate, that they need some Democrats to cross over. But they've also told the Democrats, if you give us the votes that are necessary to approve a new budget, we're not going to hesitate to use the rescission mechanism, use the clawback of just by 50 votes in the Senate, canceling those budget plans that you approved in a way that just is what Donald Trump wants to do. So I think it's hard for the Democrats to trust what the Republicans are saying these days.
And finally, just on this issue, Brian, these continuing resolutions, I think, are frustrating to Americans, to both sides, in as much as we seem to keep kicking the can down the road. We don't seem to do that here locally in the state of Utah, but doesn't there come a point, or isn't there some solution to the idea that we just continue to have these continuing resolutions?
Yeah. I mean, it's certainly not a way to run an efficient government. There's no doubt about that. You gotta figure out a way to get your financial house in order. We all know that as individuals. We know it as a state. And the state constitution, one of the reasons we know it as a state is because the state constitution mandates it. They require that. The federal government doesn't require that. We've debated whether to put a balanced budget amendment in the Constitution at the United States level for years. But right now, we don't have that. And look, unless you have people with discipline and unless you have people who are willing to work together to negotiate, unless you have the will on the part of the taxpayer to fund the government at the level they really want so that it doesn't run deficits every year, we're going to continue to have these deficit problems at the national level. And I'm really worried that at some point it's going to cause significant problems for us.
Let me pivot for a minute here, Brian, because we're lucky to have you not only as a political leader, but as a legal leader in our state. And talk to us about the redistricting issue, where we are. The Republicans have put forth 5 maps. I think the Democrats put 1. We're currently in a public response period, public information period, and input, I should say. We come back. The legislature is going to meet next week. I know you spent a lot of time in the legislature. You're no longer there. But what do you expect to come out of the legislature next week? And what do you think the hearing will look like when they get to the court again?
Yeah, I think you're going to see the legislature vote on a map that they present to the court as being, okay, here's our legislative map for what we would like you to put in place, Judge Gibson. Judge Gibson then will have the obligation to evaluate that map and decide whether it accurately represents the principles of Amendment Proposition 4, the whole anti-gerrymandering redistricting amendment to the statutes that the legislature, or rather the people of the state of Utah passed back in 2018. I think the critical thing here that we're looking for as Democrats is just a balanced playing field, a fair map. And I hope Judge Gibson evaluates that. I'm sure she will evaluate what she orders be put in place based on those principles. What do the people of the state of Utah want? They want maps that aren't drawn by the politicians. They want maps that are fair and give them an honest, level playing field shot at electing the people that they want. So after you have Judge Gibson's ruling, the lieutenant governor, Deidre Henderson, has made it very clear. Look, guys, I have a very short window to put in place what's going to be on the ticket in 2026. So you got to have things finalized by November 10th. Things are going to have to happen very quickly between the special session next week and November 10th, if that's going to happen. I'm keeping my fingers crossed that we do have fair and balanced maps that give candidates from both parties and the voters of the state of Utah a shot at making sure that they put in place what they want, what the voters want. That's the only fair thing to do. That was the thing that bugged me about what the Republicans put out yesterday is they want to see the game rigged to the greatest extent possible that helps them. I want to look at the people of the state of Utah and say, let's do what you said you wanted to do back in 2018 when you said we want to have fair, balanced maps. Let's just how about this? Let's give Utahns what they asked for.
Brian, what can you tell us about, this is another pivot, and I apologize in advance, the whole ballot initiative process. It seems to me that, and we've only got a minute left, that the voters get frustrated with the legislature over things like redistricting, over things like legal cannabis, over things like expanded Medicaid. I'm talking about just three ballot initiatives from 2018. But what's the message that our legislature is apparently not getting? Because they're trying to, and maybe that's too harsh, but they're trying to say, look, these ballot initiatives don't make sense. You elect us for a purpose, that is to put in legislation. But every once in a while, the citizens seem to think you're not doing what we want you to do.
Right. The legislature, trust me, I've seen this play out many, many, many times. The legislature thinks they're above it all. They think they know better than Utahns. They don't think that they are accountable. They believe that they can pretty much make any decision that they want, no matter how extreme, and that they're bulletproof. The people either don't have the knowledge or the will to come to the polls and vote them out of office. And until they get the message that they're accountable to the people, they're going to continue to act that arrogant way. That's just the way we are as human beings. And so, we got to have people. One of the things that was great is that in the spring, we stood up as people in the state of Utah and gathered signatures to put that union-busting bill that the legislature passed on the ballot. That, I think, reflected the fact that Utahns are beginning to wake up, and thank goodness for that.
Yeah, seriously. That was the Utah Democratic Party Chair Brian King, who joined us this morning and took some time out of his busy schedule. He was newly elected as Democratic Party Chair and seems to have a lot of energy.